Hi everyone. I have the privilege and pleasure of talking to Naoli Vinaver. Today she is a midwife from Mexico, has been practicing midwifery for the last 40 years and has been a huge inspiration for many midwives like me across the world. We have, like, as a childbirth educator, when I started in the birth world, one of the very first videos that I landed up watching was a video which was called The Birthday, and that sort of always had made such a big impression, not only on me but on every childbirth class that I taught, the parents as well as the childbirth educators whom I taught, and to me, being able to bring her here into the Sanctum to India and have her talking to us over here is an absolute pleasure. And we have just completed a 2-day advanced Rebozo skills workshop, which is one of her specialties. And thank you very much, Naoli, for being here, for doing all the work that you do. And I also want to sort of ask you a little bit about your journey into midwifery, and we'll take the questions as they come along, but I also wanted to first introduce yourself a little bit more to people who don't necessarily know you that much.
Thank you so much. It is a real big pleasure to be invited here at the Sanctum. As a midwife, I've been passionate about birth in the way that it empowers women, it empowers the babies coming through and the families that are becoming mother and father, and maybe just gaining a new sibling or a new child in their family. It makes such an impact in the lives of people. And as a midwife, I've always been fascinated by discovering what it is that each woman will require to find that power, that decision that's very internal to be able to give birth to her child. And of course, the surrounding people that support her, and in the case a midwife, but also just the family, the birth professionals, will have the biggest impact. So as a midwife, I have always dedicated my life since I was, even before 20 years old, I was very clear that my passion was birth. Mm-hmm. And anytime I would encounter a pregnant woman, I would just have to go and put my ear to her belly since I was a little girl. So it was always my passion. And when I was about 20 years old, I started dreaming every night of births. Every night I would wake up and the recurrent topic was I was alone with a birthing mother, nobody else was there, and she was giving birth and she needed support, and I would have to help her. And in my dreams, there would be details. The membranes would rupture, sometimes a cord would prolapse, or there would be bleeding, or maybe a baby would come with an arm force, details. And I had to solve situations in my dreams to help this mother and this child, give birth and be born. And of course, in the mornings, I would wake up like that with all the details fresh in my mind. I started reading. Mm-hmm. What else could I have done? Mm-hmm. Did I do things right? Could I have had a different technique? I had no idea on the obstetrical world or even the details on midwifery. Mm-hmm. I started reading books. I ran into books written by midwives, by obstetricians. I started meeting midwives, and right away I realized I'm being taken as if it's by a river of life into birth. And so, of course, at that time I was finishing my BA in anthropology. I was writing my thesis. I had to make a big effort to write it. I said, if I don't finish it, I'll never come back to it. So I made a point of finishing it, which had to do with dance and song and oral tradition, nothing to do with birth, but of course, other passions of mine. But I kept going to read the books about birth and learning. It was self-learning. And of course, as I met other midwives, I started apprenticing with them. And I started going to births with them and learning. And it was very clear to me that midwives were specialists in birth. They knew about birth. The old midwives, the traditional midwives of my country, they knew about herbs, they knew about the heat and the warmth and the patience and the massages and the rebozo, which is this piece of clothing, because the rebozo in Mexico is used as a piece of clothing. Mm-hmm. But in the bag of the midwife, it is a tool. It is a resource. So I started learning how to use it. We use it to embrace a part of the body of the mother, could be the hips, the belly area, the torso, and we move it in a certain rhythm with a certain pace in an angle that's very specific to adjust the baby's position inside of the womb, to adjust the baby's head into the pelvis, to facilitate birth, especially complicated or complex births. Most births may not need any help, but the midwives had to solve those difficulties because most of them don't live in a community near a hospital. They don't have health facilities or birth facilities. They have, for centuries and millennia, solved birth difficulties. So I was so lucky and so fortunate to be able to learn from old traditional midwives from my country. I even traveled in different regions. As soon as I heard there's a fantastic old midwife, I made a point of making time to go and introduce myself, and it was quite interesting because those midwives, they don't just say, oh, come in, I'll teach you everything. No, no, no. Who are you? They test you for days. They just let you kind of, okay, pick that up. Okay, go gather that plant, and they just keep observing to see if you've got it.
But they welcomed you.
They welcomed me. I think they were flattered that this young woman would travel. Sometimes I had to travel, 6-8 hours by bus and then walk for another 3 or 4 hours into their community, or maybe take a ride on a donkey. I had to go far away, away from my home, and they were a little shocked, like, this has never happened. Who is this woman with green eyes coming to apprentice? Yes. And after a few days or two, they would say, okay, the pregnant women or laboring women would come in their home and they would say, palpate, and they would watch me to see if I knew what I was doing. And, I would do what I had learned in my dreams, what I had read about, and also, my own sensitivity, and they apparently were impressed. They felt, okay, I can teach her. So I was very fortunate to have 6 different traditional midwives who I apprenticed with, and I learned a lot about birth with. But I always also kept reading. I kept reading about direct entry midwifery, which is connected to what is called professional midwifery, even outside of the medical system, but midwives who have pioneered into recovering the midwifery profession, apart from the medical obstetrics, but with getting back to, I think, bringing together actually old tricks and old wisdom and knowledge about physiology of birth, together with the language of obstetrics and the concepts of obstetrics, so that you're not separated from it. You can actually coexist in the modern world, in a city, in a society that cares about safety.
And a bit more scientific, knowledge-based, evidence-based practices.
Yes, exactly. So, my trajectory has been to bring together what I consider to be the best of the 2 worlds. Because I don't mean to romanticize traditional midwifery either. Sometimes I would get called by a traditional midwife in the region where I grew up and I lived to help with the birth. And when I got there, they would say, she's been pushing for 3 days and the baby's not coming out. And when I went to check, the woman was not even in labor. So yes, it's not just because the traditional midwife is traditional that she will know everything, or that a doctor is a doctor, that they will be doing things that are not respectful. No, there are good and less experienced professionals in all the realms. So my passion has been actually to learn and to bring together. And I actually organized 8 different conferences in Mexico. The first midwifery conferences were my initiative, and my point was to bring together those traditional midwives with professional midwives who were trained and certified in different aspects, doctors, pediatricians, obstetricians, from even different countries, to share knowledge, to exchange and to celebrate birth together. So that is something that I have been doing as a calling, not only as a midwife that I attend births, and I do attend births, I will continue for a long time. It's my passion. I think my lively energy comes and is derived from the excitement of receiving life.
Yes, of course.
But also giving birth to to new midwives. You know, when you train a new midwife, when you train someone who wants to learn, you share knowledge with them, you know that they will in turn also be having a very positive effect on another mother, on another child. Perhaps they will eventually be training other people. I think the world needs education.
Yes. Yes. And I also feel that the world needs people to come together rather than be separated. Everyone, when you come together for a purpose, which is bringing life into this world, how much more can we, you know, we need to bring those divergent experiences, but we also are converging on helping that mom and baby, right? So I feel the more we are in silos, working in silos, we are going to land up really kind of talking in an echo chamber. Everyone who knows this will only know this. Everyone who knows that will only know that.
Agrees.
And then,
yes.
Exactly. So I think it's super important that, you know, you're bringing together these people, but also I think with the body of work that you have behind you, I think that gives you that legitimacy to be able to talk, because it's not that you're just, you know, coming up and saying, do this my way, but you're trying to also say that this is what has been my experience, what has been yours, and let's come and talk together. So I think that's really beautiful.
And I think I couldn't agree more that bringing an interdisciplinary team together, and not be, you know, maybe a pediatrician, but of course a traditional midwife should always be in some way present, whether it's, you know, physically or at least acknowledging her wisdom, acknowledging what she knows and what she has taught to new generations. Because, you know, we have to be honest, most of the people in the world still are born at home.
Exactly.
You know, there is such huge amounts of geographical territory in the world where have no access to, you know, public health or even, you know, clinics, and they still are born at home. The midwives still attend births. They still carry out, you know, a big amount of work that should be considered and should be celebrated, and there must be gratitude to those pioneers of birth, instead of saying, okay, we don't need you anymore. Exactly. No, of course, we can bring together those forces. Right. And that is one of the things that I've been doing for the past, 35 to 40 years, is going to teach at conferences, doing seminars, doing workshops to share that knowledge. But also I love it when an obstetrician comes, a pediatrician comes, I give, you know, everybody has their own place. And I think if we're all going to expand our knowledge and learn, we have to feel not antagonistic, but inclusive, like you were saying. Absolutely. And who is to benefit is the mother and the child. And the family.
And I think the world over, the traditional midwives are sort of being pushed into the background. It's not new. But I also feel that when we look at midwifery just as a profession, my other question that I wanted to ask you was, over 40 years, the 35, 40 years of being a midwife, what have you seen as changes in the birth world?
Okay, so when I began as a midwife, there were many more people who would be going to hospitals because it was the norm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'm pregnant, you know, I should do a doctor's consultation. And I knew that at first people would be surprised, oh, a midwife? Oh, I don't have to go necessarily to a doctor to tell me if I'm okay. You can actually do prenatal care, you can actually assess blood pressure, you can assess the baby's position, the heartbeat of the baby, you can check even the lab tests, you can, you know, everything. So people started to learn that there is a core responsibility. Mm-hmm. The prenatal care is not really the day they go to do the checkup, but everything they do at home, how they eat, how they care for themselves and their exercises or lack of, and just their everyday life. And so I have seen that not only in my personal life as a midwife, more and more and more people becoming conscious of, wow, it's my doing, it's my work to actually care for myself and give birth. Mm-hmm. You know, as I wouldn't say autonomous, because I also believe that there should be a midwife there. Why not? Yes. You can give birth by yourself, but what if something is needed? What if there is a hemorrhage? What if the baby's not breathing? I think somebody should be there to help.
Like not necessarily everybody has to go for a free birth.
Yes.
And
yes.
but having someone there as a pair of hands to really hold space and work in case there is a need, right?
Yes, and I know many people in Russia and other countries have chosen to free birth because they can't find midwives or doctors who respect their line and their beliefs, you know, their philosophies of life. But occasionally there might be a tragedy. Occasionally there was a need for something and there was nobody to do it, nobody who knew how to solve the situation. So I believe very firmly in creating more responsible people, birth workers who can actually adapt and respect the wishes of the birthing women while safeguarding their health and, you know, the baby's health.
And that's what all the studies are showing, that when a midwife is present, there is less of, you know, problems, less trauma, less, you know, postpartum hemorrhages, less, you know, instrumental births. I mean, there is what, 53 different parameters that have shown to be improved with midwifery. So I think that tells a lot about it being a profession, but standing alongside, not one level underneath. So in Mexico, has it, like the traditional the direct entry midwifery, for example, are the midwives seen as an equal to the doctor, or do you still feel that there is that?
Depends who you ask.
Yeah.
Most doctors would never agree. Most OBs would say, what do you mean? Midwife hasn't studied what I've studied, right? But if you talk to doctors who have already started looking at the birth process as a physiological, deeply human event in a woman's life, in a child's life. For example, I've been the midwife to many OBs, either female OBs who decide I want to give birth at home out of that system which is going to try to control me and get me into a series of interventions that I don't want to, you know, kind of give into. And also male doctors whose wives get pregnant. Oftentimes they look for a midwife to be supporting them. And I find that beautiful because, you know, they can be part of the team, they can be backup, they can be, you know, as their specialty. I don't think it's one or the other. I think we can work together.
Absolutely.
So I have seen changes. I also feel that the media, being able to post videos for people to see videos of what is possible. You were mentioning my birth video called Birthday, which is the birth of my third child. She was born in 1999. It was videoed by my father. My father was one of my most favorite people in the world, along with my mother. They were at each one of my birthings. And after we videoed that, there was a team of people who asked me, would you give us the video to edit it? And I said, sure, fine. And they made a 10-minute long edition that got translated into 16 languages. And boom, it just went all over the world. That was in the, 2000, the year 2000. And it became, yes, surprisingly to me at that time, a reference for many of the childbirth educators around the world to teach couples that birth can be natural, that a woman...
Simple.
And simple.
And simple, yes.
But I feel that even since then, people started getting encouraged. Oh my God, I could actually post my video. I could actually share it with my family, share it with people. Now there is Instagram, Facebook, and all those different... And people have been learning more about birth. I feel that's been positive because women have realized, why should I have a C-section? Maybe I can actually give birth. And then they start looking for teams or midwives or different people. I think it has helped for many OBs to open up their minds and to say, okay, if a woman wants a more respectful birth, why can't I give a more respectful birth? Why can't I be more patient, more accessible? Maybe I will even have a doula do the tiring work of being in labor, massaging, and the OB doesn't necessarily have to exhaust themselves. They can be patient and respectful without getting exhausted. They can still attend the other clients while a doula or someone else is caring for the woman in labor. So I think it has facilitated teamwork in an interdisciplinary manner. It's been very positive, I think.
For sure, I think I really feel like one of the things that the film has done it is over the course of years, it has been that, like you said, that reference point where we can go back and say, okay, there are many kinds of birth, but you can, to me, I always have felt that it has been, when I point it out, I say, it's a simple event. We don't need to complicate it. We don't need to overthink about it. But I also feel like the cultures that we give birth in, the overall perception of birth can be a very, very dramatic event, a traumatic event, or something that there is, over the last 40, 50 years, if I look at India, for example, we also have a very rich tradition of traditional midwifery. Of course, from the government perspective, reducing maternal mortality, infant mortality, and all of that is very important. It has come down. But I feel like because we have gone so far into the medicalized, the whole community begins to fear birth.
Yes.
So how have you seen that, maybe not in your immediate community, but as you travel across the world, have you seen that similar kind of societal fear of birth increase?
I feel that part of the strategy of obstetrics has been feeding the fear, or the culture of fear around birth, because it's easier to control a woman, to convince her to have a cesarean if you say, well, you maybe are going to risk your baby suffering. That's up to you if you want to run the risk. Yes. Maybe the baby won't be fine, maybe it'll die. They have fed into the fears of women. And even the movies, you always see the scream and the woman bleeding. It has been portrayed as a dramatic bomb about to explode. Exactly. And that's contributed greatly to the fear that women acquire. And then, of course, it carries from one generation to the other. If the pregnant mother was born by cesarean, because her mother had a birth that was traumatic and that ended up being intervened with high technology and maybe not having been explained to her, exactly, that fear is carried down to the next generation, and it is harder, much harder to clean it up. Correct. You may say to the woman, oh, trust birth, your body's perfect, and she's like, really? Well, convince me, because my mother had a terrible story, my cousin and my sister and everybody in my family. So I think big part of our job as midwives and childbirth educators and doulas and even OBs and even pediatricians should be education. Yes. It should be trying to dismantle the great myths surrounding birth, because there are many myths. Oh my God, the cord around the neck. The cord around the neck is not a big problem. Once the head is out, you check the cord, and if it's wrapped, you could either loop it over, or the baby is born through the loop of the cord. 3 times around the neck, 3 times at the... those are things that when you are a practicing midwife, exactly, you see that often. 1 out of 4 or 5 births will have the cord. Absolutely. And yet it's used as an excuse. Oh, she had to have a cesarean because she had the cord around the neck. And it's part of the mythology.
It is even worse, because you get an ultrasound so frequently. The current obstetric practices are you get an ultrasound. Some hospitals will have an ultrasound every month. Some will have it 4 or 5 times, and one at the end of pregnancy. And it feeds into the fear of this due date, because the due dates are so inaccurate at the end of pregnancy. B, it feeds into the fear of the big baby or small baby or whatever it might be, low fluid, high fluid, Everything that can potentially go wrong can go wrong. There's nobody perfect until after the baby is born, right? It's always like that's a...
But then if they did a cesarean or if they induced, they say, well, thank God we did.
Exactly.
Imagine if we hadn't.
Exactly.
And yet they will never know. If they hadn't, it's possibly, highly possibly, everything would have gone well anyway.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And so where I started to see that ultrasound then says cord around the neck. And then that's the parent is imagining this cord strangling the baby. And so you already have put that fear into them. And then, of course, the radiologist might say something about it. Now I have had very weird things like cord near the nape of the neck. Well, the cord's got to be somewhere. It's got to be somewhere, And so that becomes a very, it's almost like every single thing that is told to them, as it is, women are sensitive towards the end of pregnancy.
Oh,
and you're so...
They'll do anything to protect their baby.
Exactly, exactly.
And if we talk about statistics,
Yes.
Hard science,
Yes.
statistics, many countries, I know India is one, Mexico is one, Brazil is one, with very high cesarean rate,
Yes.
very high induction rate, very high episiotomy rate, etc. What would be the percentage of C-section in a public hospital here?
This state has really bad numbers, but somewhere around about 40%, 40-45% is public hospital. Private hospitals today stands at 79.8%, which is 80%. So if you have in between that, the average comes to around some 60-some%. Yeah. So basically, you're saying 6 out of 10 women in the state don't know how to give birth vaginally.
Right. That's what. Yeah, because each one of those women are told that she needed it.
Absolutely.
And she's going to come out convinced that she needed it. She'll tell everybody around her that she needed it because it'll make her feel better.
Absolutely.
Rather than saying, I didn't need it, right? Now, if you look at the statistics of midwives such as myself, 2% transfers to the hospital. If out of 100, you only have to transfer 2% to the hospital, what is that saying? And I'm not saying I only take extremely low risk women. I take everyone. I take everyone. And of course, once in a while, I'll say, your sugar level is, maybe your high blood pressure is a little high, but that would be within the 2%. I'm taking everyone because if she got pregnant, the most likely possibility is she will be able to give birth. And it's during the prenatal care that she gets empowered, that she gets educated, that she gets conscious, that she takes really good care of herself. But I've attended births of 12-year-old girls, 52-year-old women, and everything in between. 14, 13, 15, 16-year-old women, so common. And they give birth beautifully. The 35, the 50-year-old woman, the 48-year-old woman, beautiful births because they're taking good care of themselves.
Absolutely.
So there is also a little bit of a myth that you should only, or that only very low risk women can have good births. You have to question a little bit.
You then start to risk out everybody. Who's left? Yeah. You risk out these, you risk out that, you risk out that, and then you have maybe a few person, and out of that, and then even those 10% are fed these questions about their own body, so that no one's confident about it. Like you said, the cord around the neck, it's 1/3. We had a mom who had 6 loops of cord. It felt like one of those necklaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, and finally the 5th one, and still the baby is still not coming. I went inside and there was a 6th loop. So, but the baby was fine. That's the thing. So again, like you said, not romanticizing and saying everything is perfect, but to say if the baby has been okay, if the heartbeat's been okay, the baby has been, advancing,
and
everything
is
skills. Good. And if you have skills,
you have to have skills. You have to know what to do to, deal with the shoulder dystocia, with the baby that's not moving down. The Rebozo techniques that I've been teaching have a lot of techniques to prevent and solve childbirth difficulties and challenges. So we're not saying anybody could just give birth anywhere and any time. There should be training. There should be people who can learn how to deal with those situations.
And have those backups when it's required, create the safety net for the woman. You say you have a 2% transfer right in the same state where there is 80% births with, in the private hospitals born by cesarean. We have a 9.2% cesarean section rate for this past year. So it's the idea at the Sanctum, yes. So I think the idea that women know the body that made the baby knows how to bring it out, that whole idea to how do we, so when we are in this kind of society with fear, we talked about childbirth education, but how do we get the word out to the woman to really trust her body? Do you have any words for a potentially a mother who might be watching this?
Yes, I do. I think she should seek and come close to a team of birth workers who believe in birth, who know physiology of birth, who have the time to sit down and explain things with her. If she has questions, they have time to answer them. And that way, slowly and clearly, the fears can become dissolved and they can become more empowered. because fear is not a very good element to have in birth. And in order to get rid of fear, you replace it with knowledge. Yes, and with understanding. So I think that education will play a big role. And the woman and her family need to be able to trust that birth team. And you don't get that trust automatically. You have to have conversations. You have to talk about death and problems and situations, because if they never ask the question, they're going to bring it to their house and they're going to be going, oh my God, what if something goes wrong? They should ask the question. Okay, what about this? What about that? And then whoever is attending that woman and who's going to be at the birth will say, okay, how do we prevent those situations? How do we treat them? And how often do they actually occur? And that's going to dissipate. It's going to clear her peace of mind, will be much better, and then she'll be better prepared to give birth.
Absolutely. I think that's the key piece, isn't it? Like where the woman actually takes agency of her own body, not just to say like, okay, I find the nearest hospital. That's the other thing too. Like oftentimes, especially here, because there is that fear of birth, you want to find the hospital that is closest to you because you think anything can happen, right? But it's very rare that anything just happens out of the blue. And for them to take agency of their body, to get their family on board, it's so many layers that she has to then say, I am the one who is giving birth, and then take that and then find that resonance with her care provider, and not just say, it's okay, you tell me, I've outsourced my body, you tell me what to do. I do want to ask a little bit more about this Rebozo, because we have been doing this for the last couple of days here and learning from you. But I also wanted to ask you, can you explain a bit more specifically about what you have, of course, learned as a midwife over the years, but your own maneuvers and skills that you have developed with the Rebozo. Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yes, of course. I'm very passionate about a technology that does a lot of good and basically no harm. And the Rebozo, it looks like it's nothing. It's a piece of cloth. But in fact, when you can understand the anatomy and the physiology of birth, and you see, when you identify when it's not flowing, when it's not really going towards the actual birth, maybe the baby's head is malposition, maybe the baby's back is in the wrong angle, maybe it just needs to rotate, maybe the mother's pelvis is really tense, her muscles are full of fear and contractures. The baby won't be able to engage and come down and be born. So as a midwife, if you can identify, you learn to see the fear in the woman's eyes. You can learn to read the body. You see a body that's contracted, or when the contraction comes, she's tensing up and trying to run away from her body. So as a midwife, working in a rural area, I was born and grew up in a rural area in Mexico. My community was of indigenous women who had no access, no proper access to the hospital. They could go, but they would not get well treatment, well treated. They would be, there is racism.
Exactly.
Yeah, they wouldn't want to go there. So I was chosen as their midwife over and over and over again. I would do just about everything possible for their babies to be born safely at home. And sometimes there would be challenges. So sometimes the traditional techniques I learned from the old midwives in Mexico weren't covering it all. So it's like, okay, I have to be able to do something else to help this woman and to help this baby. So I would start, okay, I'm going to try something different. You have to use your imagination, the creativity, and also the need. When you are actually faced with challenges and you don't have a scalpel, you don't have the operating room, you don't have, thank God you don't have it right there, because then it pushes you to invent a solution. Yes. And if you look at the world, humanity, how did the first person that invented the wheel invented the wheel? Out of the need, there was probably a heavy weight and they needed to go up the hill, big stone. Okay, how can we roll it up? And once that was learned, you repeat it because it worked. And that's how it was for me with the Rebozo techniques that I actually authored. Because one time I needed to solve a situation that I didn't know a solution for. I invented it, it worked, I'm going to use it again. And then the next time I needed it, it was already there. And I developed it in such a way that, I became quite specialized in the Rebozo. It's been a tool of mine. Not that many midwives that I know use a rebozo so passionately. I know that the old midwives do, but sometimes maybe they're old. Maybe they're old, they don't see as well, they're tired, they've been worn out. And they have been working so devotedly for so long, they need to have new midwives coming in. So I've been privileged to be able to be apprenticing with old midwives and have had the stamina, the energy, and the passion to bring forth and to move forward the tradition of the rebozo. And, it's just, I'm humble about it because I think not everything is I. You channel, sometimes you just like get an intuition. You can't even say, oh, I'm so intelligent. Sometimes you open up and something just drops in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you just feel thankful. Oh, I'm so glad. I've had situations in which there's a challenge and I just feel if I focus, I'm not going to run away and abandon the woman. Focus and I can feel the presence of old midwives incarnating. I think there is something about, and maybe even backed by science saying, quantum physics. Yeah. The knowledge travels through time and space, the energy can come forth. I feel that people who are dedicated to their craft or their art or their science, their passion, their profession, we can receive the message of, and it's nothing esoteric. It's nothing, oh my God, it's spiritual. Yes, it might be spiritual, but it's certainly going to be proven by science.
And I really feel what you're saying, because sometimes it feels like there are no answers, and yet it comes. In that room, in that moment, I always feel like when there is that challenge, to me, it's almost like there is no panic at that time. Like if you've been in that situation long enough, you're like, okay, 1, 2, 3, yes, I wanted to resolve it immediately and as quickly as possible. But you're right, I'm like able to understand the essence of what you're saying, because it is not anything that is written or taught, or for someone like me who'd never had a community of midwives around to learn from. It's just that sometimes you stand there and you're like, okay, this is what's going. So I don't even think I can verbalize it.
Well, let me see if we can together. It requires for you to let the fear not take over.
Exactly.
You just put the fear away and you say, I need to find a solution.
Exactly.
You have to surrender and kind of open up your whole being. And once you just, it's almost like a state of being of openness and channeling. And then things come. Yeah. I've felt it many times. I think the intuition, people say, oh, I'm not intuitive. No, it's not possible. Maybe your brain is too active and you're trying to over-rationalize things. But if you just breathe and relax for a second, and some people may call it a prayer, you just open up and want to receive, things come. Yeah. And I think OBs will agree, because it doesn't require for you to be a midwife to have that. OBs and any other kind of professional can also feel it and have it. We get answers. Yeah. I think probably in a few years there will be a way to prove this scientifically.
I'm sure.
And it's already being called quantum physics, that the energy travels, that telepathy, for example. Oh, I was just thinking about you and you called. There is something energetic taking place. Yeah. And a mother and a child are completely open. They're like antennas. They're channels of life energy. And we're there to help facilitate that life to come through. And if we just can feel the baby and feel the mother, we come up with incredible solutions.
I feel like that's the thing, right? I think that birth is happening anyway. The universe has decided that birth is going to happen. We just happen to be in the position of being there to witness and provide a safety when it is needed. Yeah. And so how can you not be in that energetic field? There is no way you cannot be in that energetic field. Yeah. Somewhere it has to be that. And when you talk about that humility, I feel that humility as well, because you cannot ever know everything about any mom and any baby ever. You have all the knowledge, the books, the skills and whatever, but at the end of the day, that mom, that baby in that moment, it is that energetic field of what they have created, what you're creating. Sometimes, like you were talking in the workshop, taking away people who were not needing to be there, bringing in people and saying, giving you a task to do, but eventually creating that that the positive field around the mom. So,
Yeah,
so
that's
very important. So I know it's been a wonderful, wonderful 2-day workshop, and I've learned so much, Naoli, so much. And like, there were times when light bulbs went off in my head saying, well, that I could have used for that birth, or maybe this. So it's always an expansion of the skills and knowledge.
Even myself, sometimes I say, oh my God, I forgot about that. This is when I can use it again. Whatever we're looking at, sometimes we're leaving something out. So we have to kind of keep our scope open. And the resources are so plentiful, so plentiful. It was a joy for me to be here on this workshop. I love the Indian culture. The women have a lot of devotion and love for caring for others, for the mothers and the children. I love your dedication, your passion. It comes through so clearly and so strongly. My husband was saying that he's also so impressed by, the Indian culture. There is a lot of devotion.
Thank you.
Yes, and Johnny, my husband, was saying, oh, I think many Westerners, they get tired so fast. Yeah. Oh, I've tried it. It's can't be done. What do you mean it can't be done? Perseverance and dedication are a virtue, and I think those are elements that are especially appreciated in the birth process.
Yeah, totally. I think in India there is this word called jugaad, and that basically means making do with whatever you have, and try bringing whatever elements you have to make it work. And I think that's really so much true of the birth, isn't it? Bringing whatever is possible to help that woman give birth. Thank you so much, Naoli. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure having you here, and I hope that the work that you do spreads more and more and more, and I hope that you're able to come back here again and teach a larger audience. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, sisters in the same path.
Yes,
and empowering the women and the babies and the families. I think it's never going to be enough.
Right? Exactly. But thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.